Ed Branson bought the Massey Ferguson 5711 in April 2021. He was 53 years old and he farmed 400 acres of wheat and milo outside of Hays, Kansas. He had been looking for a utility tractor to replace his aging John Deere 575E, and the Massey Ferguson had checked all the boxes. It was a 2019 model, 110 horsepower, 4-cylinder diesel, cab with air conditioning. It had 1,800 hours on it, which was reasonable for a 2-year-old machine. The dealer was a place called Heartland Ag Equipment in Salina, about an hour east of Ed's farm. The salesman's name was Rick, and he had walked Ed through the specs, showed him the service records, and let him test drive it around the lot. Everything worked. The transmission shifted smooth, the hydraulics were responsive, the PTO engaged clean. Ed asked about the title. Rick said it was clear. No liens, no issues. The previous owner had traded it in for a larger machine. Ed ran a Carfax-style equipment report through an online service. It came back clean, no accidents, no insurance claims, no red flags. The asking price was $68,000. Ed negotiated it down to $62,000. He financed it through his bank at 6.2% over 5 years, monthly payment of $1,200. He signed the papers on April 14, 2021, and drove the Massey Ferguson home on a trailer the next day. For 3 years, the tractor performed exactly as expected. Ed used it for everything: pulling a disc, running a rotary mower, hauling a grain cart, plowing snow in the winter. The engine never hesitated. The transmission never slipped. The hydraulics never leaked. Ed kept up with the maintenance: oil changes every 150 hours, filters on schedule, greasing every week. By the spring of 2024, the Massey Ferguson had 2,400 hours on it, and it was still running like it was new. Ed had made 36 payments. He owed $28,000 on the loan. The tractor was worth about $55,000 on the used market. He had equity. He had a reliable machine. He had no complaints. That changed on June 11, 2024, when the letter arrived. It came in a thick envelope from Massey Ferguson, North America, marked certified mail, return receipt requested. Ed signed for it at the post office and opened it in his truck. Inside was a formal recall notice. The letter said that Massey Ferguson had identified a safety defect in certain models manufactured between 1958 and 1962. Specifically, the Massey Ferguson 35, a utility tractor produced in the company's UK factory. The defect involved the steering box, which could fail under load and cause loss of directional control. Owners of affected machines were advised to cease operation immediately and contact an authorized dealer for a free inspection and repair. The letter included a list of affected serial numbers. Ed scanned the list. His heart stopped. His serial number was on the list. The letter said his Massey Ferguson, serial number TVO 35487, was a 1960 Massey Ferguson 35, subject to the recall. Ed read the letter 3 times. Then he walked out to the shed and looked at his tractor. It was a 2019 Massey Ferguson 5711, not a 1960 Massey Ferguson 35. The two machines didn't even look similar. The MF-35 was a small, vintage tractor with an open operator station and maybe 35 horsepower. The 5711 was a modern cab tractor with 110 horsepower and a digital dashboard. There was no way anyone could confuse the two. Ed climbed up into the cab and looked at the serial number plate. It was riveted to the frame rail on the right side, just below the door. The plate read TVO 35487. The same number from the recall letter. Ed pulled out his phone and took a picture. Then he called the dealer. Rick answered on the 3rd ring. Ed explained the situation. He said he had received a recall notice for a 1960 tractor, but he owned a 2019 model, and the serial numbers matched. Rick said it sounded like a clerical error, probably a database glitch. He said Massey Ferguson's records were digitized back in the 1990s, and sometimes old serial numbers got mixed up with new ones. He told Ed to call Massey Ferguson customer service and get it straightened out. Ed thanked him and hung up. He called the number on the recall letter. A woman answered. Ed explained the situation. The woman asked for his serial number. Ed gave it to her. She put him on hold. 5 minutes later, she came back. She said according to Massey Ferguson's records, Serial number TVO 35487 was assigned to a 1960 Massey Ferguson 35 manufactured at the Banner Lane factory in Coventry, England. Ed said that was impossible. He said he was looking at a 2019 Massey Ferguson 5711 with that serial number. The woman said she understood, but the VIN in the system didn't match a 2019 model. She suggested he send photos and documentation to their technical services department for review. Ed said he would. He hung up and sat in his truck, staring at the tractor. Ed spent the next 2 days gathering documentation. He pulled the original sales contract from Heartland Ag Equipment. He pulled the title from his filing cabinet. He pulled the loan documents from his bank. He pulled the insurance policy. He pulled the service records. Every document listed the tractor as a 2019 Massey Ferguson 57111, serial number TVO 1135487. He took dozens of photos from every angle: the cab, the engine, the instrument panel, the serial number plate. He compiled everything into a folder and emailed it to Massey Ferguson Technical Services. The email confirmation said he would receive a response within 5 to 7 business days. Ed waited. On day 6, he got a reply. The email was from a technical specialist named Gary Feldman. Feldman said he had reviewed the photos and documentation. He said the tractor in the photos was clearly a 2019 MF 5711. However, the serial number TVO 1355487 was registered in Massey Ferguson's global database as a 1960 MF 35. Feldman said this was a serious discrepancy. He said it was possible the serial number plate on Ed's tractor had been altered or replaced. He recommended an in-person inspection by an authorized Massey Ferguson representative. Ed replied and said he would agree to an inspection. Feldman said he would arrange it. The inspection took place on a Tuesday in early July. The Massey Ferguson field representative's name was David Corman. He was in his 50s, balding, wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt with the Massey Ferguson logo. He drove a white pickup with a toolbox in the bed. Ed met him in the yard. Corman shook his hand and asked to see the tractor. Ed led him to the shed. Corman walked around the Massey Ferguson slowly, taking notes on a tablet. He climbed into the cab and started the engine. He engaged the PTO. He tested the hydraulics. He shut it down and climbed out. He said the tractor was definitely a 2019 MF 5711. No question. Then he asked to see the serial number plate. Ed showed him. Corman pulled a small flashlight and a jeweler's loupe from his pocket. He examined the plate closely. He took photos with his phone. He ran his fingers over the rivets. Then he looked at Ed and said they needed to talk. Corman said the serial number plate had been swapped. The plate itself was authentic. It was a real Massey Ferguson serial plate from 1960, but it didn't belong on this tractor. Corman pointed out the details. The rivets holding the plate to the frame were newer than the frame itself. The paint around the plate showed signs of disturbance. Someone had removed the original plate and replaced it with this one. Ed asked why anyone would do that. Corman said there were a few reasons. The most common was VIN fraud. If a tractor had a serious defect or was involved in a lemon law buyback, the manufacturer would flag that VIN in the system. The tractor would be unsellable with that VIN. So unscrupulous dealers would swap the plate with one from a junked or scrapped machine, giving the problem tractor a clean identity. Ed felt his stomach drop. He asked if that meant his tractor was a lemon. Corman said he didn't know. He said he would need to find the original VIN to determine the tractor's real history. He asked if Ed had any documentation that might show the original serial number. Ed said no. Everything he had showed TVO-35487. Corman spent the next hour searching the tractor for the original VIN. Massey Ferguson stamped serial numbers in multiple locations as an anti-theft measure. The primary plate was on the frame rail, but there were also stamps on the engine block, the transmission housing, and sometimes the axle. Corman found the engine stamp first. It was on the side of the block, near the oil filter. The number was partially obscured by grime, but Corman cleaned it with a rag and read it aloud. MF 5711-29-47821. That was the original VIN. Corman entered it into his tablet. The database came back immediately. Serial number MF 5711-29-47821 was was a 2019 Massey Ferguson 5711 manufactured in Beauvais, France in March 2019. It had been sold new to a dealer in Wichita, Kansas in May 2019, and in November 2020 it had been flagged for a transmission defect under warranty. The CVT had failed at 400 hours. Massey Ferguson had authorized a full transmission replacement under warranty. The repair had been completed in December 2020. And then in February 2021, the tractor had been listed as part of a lemon law settlement. The original buyer had rejected the machine after the transmission failure, citing loss of confidence. Massey Ferguson had bought it back and sold it at dealer auction as a refurbished unit with a disclosure. That disclosure was supposed to follow the machine forever. Corman showed Ed the screen. Ed read the history. He felt sick. He had bought a lemon law buyback without knowing it. Someone had swapped the VIN plate to hide the history. And that someone was almost certainly Heartland Ag Equipment, the dealer who sold it to him. Ed asked Corman what this meant for him. Corman said it meant several things, none of them good. First, the tractor's title was fraudulent. It was registered under a 1960 serial number that didn't match the machine. Second, the loan was fraudulent. The bank had financed a 2019 MF 5711, but the VIN on the paperwork didn't match the actual tractor. Third, the insurance was invalid. The policy covered a machine with a serial number that didn't exist in the real world. Fourth, Massey Ferguson could not honor any warranty or support for the tractor because the VIN in the system showed it as a lemon law buyback, which had limited warranty coverage, and the VIN Ed had been using wasn't the real one. And fifth, Ed was technically in possession of a tractor with a fraudulent VIN, which was a felony in Kansas. Ed sat down on a hay bale. He asked Corman what he was supposed to do. Corman said the first step was to contact the dealer and demand an explanation. If the dealer had knowingly swapped the VIN, that was fraud. Ed could pursue legal action. But Corman warned that legal action was expensive and slow, and there was no guarantee Ed would win. The second step was to contact the Kansas Department of Revenue and report the VIN discrepancy. The state would have to issue a corrected title with the real VIN. But that would flag the tractor as a lemon law buyback, which would tank the resale value. The third step was to contact his bank and explain the situation. The bank might call the loan due immediately because the collateral wasn't what they thought it was. The fourth step was to contact his insurance company. They would almost certainly cancel the policy. And the fifth step was to decide whether he wanted to keep the tractor or try to get rid of it. Corman said he was sorry. He said he had seen this before, but not often. It was rare. But when it happened, it was a nightmare. Ed thanked him. Corman packed up his tools and drove away. Ed sat in the shed with the Massey Ferguson and tried to process what he had just learned. Ed called Heartland Ag Equipment the next morning. He asked to speak to Rick. The receptionist said Rick no longer worked there. Ed asked when he had left. She said March 2024. Ed asked to speak to the general manager. The manager's name was Phil. Phil came on the line. Ed explained the situation. He said he had bought a 2019 MF 5711 in April 2021, and he had just discovered the VIN had been swapped. The tractor was a lemon law buyback, and the serial number plate was fraudulent. Phil was quiet for a long time. Then he said he would need to pull the file. He asked for Ed's name and the date of purchase. Ed gave him the information. Phil said he would call back. 3 hours later, Phil called. He said he had reviewed the file. He said the tractor had been purchased by Heartland Ag at a Massey Ferguson dealer auction in March 2021. The auction listing had disclosed the lemon law status. Heartland had bought it as a refurbished unit with a clear title. Phil said he had no record of the VIN being swapped. He said the serial number on the sales contract was TVO 135487, and that was the number on the plate when the tractor arrived at the dealership. Ed said that was impossible. Phil said he wasn't calling Ed a liar, but Heartland didn't swap VINs. If the VIN was fraudulent, it had been swapped before Heartland took possession. Ed asked who had owned the tractor before Heartland. Phil said it had come from the Massey Ferguson auction, which meant it had been returned to the manufacturer and refurbished. Ed asked if Massey Ferguson had swapped the VIN. Phil said he didn't know, but it seemed unlikely. Ed asked for the auction documentation. Phil said he couldn't provide that without a subpoena. Ed said he would get one. Phil said that was Ed's right. Then Phil said something else. He said even if Ed could prove the VIN had been swapped at Heartland, the dealership had sold the tractor as is with no warranty. The contract Ed signed had a clause that said the buyer was responsible for verifying all information. Phil said Heartland wasn't liable. Ed said that was fraud. Phil said it was a civil matter and Ed was welcome to pursue it, but he should talk to a lawyer first. Then Phil hung up. Ed sat at his kitchen table and stared at the phone. He had just been told politely that he was screwed. Ed called a lawyer the next day. The lawyer's name was Janet Kohler. She practiced in Hayes and specialized in agricultural law. Ed explained the situation. Janet listened. When he finished, she asked if he had documentation proving the VIN had been swapped. Ed said yes. He had the inspection report from Corman. He had photos. He had the database records showing the real VIN. Janet asked if he had proof that Heartland had done the swap. Ed said no. Heartland claimed the tractor arrived with the fraudulent VIN. Janet said that was a problem. She said to prove fraud, Ed would have to show that Heartland knowingly sold him a tractor with a fake VIN. If Heartland could argue they didn't know, they weren't liable. Ed said the VIN swap was obvious. Anyone who inspected the plate would have seen it. Janet said that wasn't enough. She said dealers inspected hundreds of machines. It was plausible they missed it. She said Ed's case was weak. Ed asked what his options were. Janet said he could sue Heartland for fraud, but it would cost at least $20,000 in legal fees, take 2 years, and he would probably lose. Or he could report the fraud to the Kansas Attorney General and hope they pursued criminal charges, but that was unlikely unless there was a pattern of behavior. Or he could try to resolve it directly with the bank, the insurance company, and the state, and take the financial hit. Ed asked how big the hit would be. Janet said it depended. If the bank called the loan, Ed would owe $28,000 immediately. If the state retitled the tractor with the real VIN, it would be flagged as a lemon, and the value would drop to maybe $35,000. Ed would be underwater on the loan. If he tried to sell it, he would have to pay the bank the difference. Janet said the best-case scenario was that Ed kept the tractor, got the title corrected, refinanced the loan, and ate the loss in value. Worst case, the bank repossessed it, sold it at auction, and Ed still owed the deficiency. Ed thanked her and hung up. Ed called his bank the next morning. He explained the situation to his loan officer, a woman named Karen who had worked with him for 15 years. Karen said she would have to escalate it to the bank's legal department. 2 days later, Karen called back. She said the bank considered the loan to be secured by a 2019 Massey Ferguson 57111, serial number TVO 135487. If that serial number was fraudulent, the collateral was misrepresented, and the bank had the right to call the loan due immediately. However, the legal department was willing to work with Ed if he could provide a corrected title with the real VIN within 60 days. Ed said he would try. Karen said if he couldn't, the bank would proceed with repossession. Ed thanked her. He hung up and called the Kansas Department of Revenue. The process of correcting the title took 7 weeks. Ed had to submit the inspection report from Corman. He had to submit photos of both VINs. He had to submit an affidavit explaining how he discovered the discrepancy. He had to pay a $200 administrative fee, and he had to surrender the fraudulent title. The state issued a new title in late August. The new title listed the tractor as a 2019 Massey Ferguson 5711, serial number MF 57111-29-47821. It also included a notation, Lemon Law Buyback, transmission defect repaired 12/2020. The notation was permanent. It would follow the tractor forever. Ed took the new title to the bank. Karen processed the update. The loan remained in place, but Karen told Ed the notation had triggered a reappraisal. The bank's equipment appraiser valued the tractor at $38,000 with the Lemon Law flag. Ed owed $28,000. He still had equity, but barely. And if he ever tried to sell it, the Lemon Law notation would scare off most buyers. Ed called his insurance company. They canceled his policy. They said the VIN discrepancy constituted a material misrepresentation and they were voiding coverage retroactively to the date of purchase. Ed asked what that meant. The agent said if Ed had filed a claim at any point in the past 3 years, it would have been denied, and Ed would have been personally liable for any damages. Ed asked if he could get a new policy with the corrected VIN. The agent said yes, but the premium would be higher because of the lemon law notation. Ed got a quote. The new premium was 40% higher than his old one. Ed accepted it. He didn't have a choice. By September 2024, Ed had been fighting the VIN issue for 3 months. He had spent $800 on legal consultation, $200 on state fees. He had lost $300 a year on increased insurance premiums, and his tractor, which had been worth $55,000 in June, was now worth $38,000 because of a notation on the title. He had lost $17,000 in value, and he still owed $28,000 on the loan. If he sold the tractor today, he would net $10,000 after paying off the bank. He had made 36 payments totaling $43,200. He had lost over $33,000. Ed tried one more time to get answers. He called Massey Ferguson corporate and asked to speak to someone in their legal department. He was transferred 3 times. Eventually, he reached a man named Holloway, who identified himself as associate counsel. Ed explained the entire situation. Holloway listened. When Ed finished, Holloway said Massey Ferguson took VIN fraud very seriously. He said the company would investigate. Ed gave him all the details. Serial numbers, dealer names, dates. Holloway said he would be in touch. 4 weeks later, Ed got a letter. The letter said Massey Ferguson had completed its investigation. They had determined that the VIN swap occurred after the tractor left Massey Ferguson's control. It had likely happened at the dealer level, either at Heartland Ag Equipment or at a previous dealer in the chain. Massey Ferguson could not determine who was responsible. The letter said Massey Ferguson regretted the situation, but the company was not liable for alterations made by third parties after the sale. The letter included a customer service gesture, a voucher for $200 toward parts or service at any authorized Massey Ferguson dealer. Ed read the letter twice. Then he put it in a drawer. Ed kept the Massey Ferguson. He didn't have a choice. Selling it would cost him money. He still owed $28,000. The tractor was worth $38,000. After paying off the loan, he would net $10,000. That wasn't enough to buy a replacement, so he kept using it. The tractor still ran fine. The transmission that had failed in 2020 had been replaced under warranty, and the replacement had held up for over 4,000 hours. The engine was strong. The hydraulics were good. Mechanically, there was nothing wrong with the machine. But every time Ed climbed into the cab, he thought about the VIN plate. He thought about the fact that someone, somewhere in the chain between Massey Ferguson and Heartland Ag Equipment, had swapped the identity of this tractor to hide its history, and that person had gotten away with it. Ed had reported it to the state. He had reported it to Massey Ferguson. He had consulted a lawyer, and nothing had happened. No charges, no accountability, just Ed, holding a tractor that worked fine but would never be worth what he paid for it. By the spring of 2025, Ed had made 48 payments on the Massey Ferguson. He owed $16,000. The tractor was still worth $38,000. He finally had meaningful equity again, but he would never get back the money he lost. He would never get back the time he spent fighting the VIN issue, and he would never know for sure who swapped the plate. Heartland Ag Equipment had closed in late 2024. The dealership had filed for bankruptcy, and the assets had been liquidated. Rick, the salesman who sold Ed the tractor, had moved to Colorado. Phil, the manager, had retired. There was no one left to hold accountable. The lawyer had been right. Ed's case was weak, and even if it hadn't been, the people responsible were gone. Ed told the story to other farmers when it came up. He told them to check the VIN stamps on the engine and transmission, not just the plate. He told them to run equipment reports on every used machine, even from trusted dealers. He told them that VIN fraud was rare, but it happened, and when it did, the buyer always lost. Some of them listened, some of them didn't. Most of them said they trusted their dealers. Ed said he had trusted his dealer too. That was the problem. The Massey Ferguson 5711 still sits in Ed's shed. It still runs, it still works. But the serial number plate on the frame rail is a lie, and the title in Ed's filing cabinet carries a notation that will never go away. The tractor ran fine for 3 years, and then a recall notice for a machine built in 1960 arrived in the mail, and Ed's life became a bureaucratic nightmare that cost him $33,000 and taught him a lesson he never wanted to learn. Sometimes the machine you buy isn't the machine you own, and proving the difference is a fight you can't win.